If you haven't already listened to parts 1, 2, and 3 of this story, I highly encourage you to do that before listening to this. Also, I mentioned in the last episode that this would be the last part of the story. It's not going to be. I'd like to keep the length of each part consistent, and I also don't want to rush any of the writing, so for those reasons there will be at least one more episode for this story. Before we get started on part 4, I'd like to do a brief recap on everything that's happened so far. Isaac and his brother Henry set sail with their father, transporting a shipload of cargo. One night, their father gave Isaac a mysterious gem called the Heart of Gaia, revealing only that it held mystical powers and had protected them. He briefly mentioned his troubled past, and then they were off to bed. Their rest was abruptly shattered by cannon fire tearing through the ship. They were captured by a monstrous pirate crew whose captain was searching for the heart. In the ensuing argument, Isaac was thrown overboard with the gem. As he sank, Isaac discovered the gem granted him the ability to breathe underwater. A massive fish swallowed him, and inside he encountered Lorelei, a majestic, ethereal being. She explained that the gem was coveted by both her people, the Insone, and the nightmarish, evil Absians. Their conversation was cut short when the Absians attacked, blowing a hole in the fish. In the chaos, Isaac, desperate to protect the heart of Gaia, swallowed it. He was then captured by the Absians and awoke, strapped to a stone altar, where a witch and other nightmarish creatures attempted to extract the gem from his stomach. Using the gem's powers, Isaac escaped, found Lorelei in a torture chamber, and together they fled through a sewage tunnel. In the tunnel, they managed to kill the witch and fend off their pursuers. The tunnel led them to the royal chamber of the Absian king, a deformed creature who claimed the Insone were the true villains. The king also told Isaac that his father had once been a pirate, and part of the very crew that had taken him. At one time, the king had recruited the pirates to take the heart from the Insone using an enchanted eye to find it. To avoid further bloodshed, the king, wary of Isaac's possession of the heart, tried to negotiate for the gem. Negotiations went sour, and Isaac and Lorelei, after taking the eye, ran from the king's chamber. Pursued by guards, they escaped out a window. Lorelei was shot with an energy blast, and Isaac caught her before she fell to a moat below. The heart of Gaia again intervened by shooting a jellyfish parachute from Isaac's back. They flew to safety over the Absian city. The power and intensity of the gem Isaac swallowed made him sick. He passed out, and they plummeted to the nightmarish city below. Isaac awakened in the apothecary of a gentle healer. She revealed that the Absians and Insone are but two sides of the same coin. They fight for similar things and are, in essence, no different. Their ruler's lust for the heart had corrupted their people. She insisted that the heart was a gift that no one was to possess, but to be possessed by all. Lorelei awakened, injured and alarmed. Isaac calmed her and explained that the healer wasn't an Absian enemy. And so, our story continues. I think we need to figure out our next move, Isaac. For all we know... Ah! Lorelei clutched her head, wincing in pain, then slumped in her chair, unconscious. The woman rushed to her and very delicately picked her up using her human and crab claws. She scuttled to the bed and laid her on it. The old healer moved with an unexpected grace, scuttling over to a drawer, rummaging through its contents with a quiet urgency. She pulled out a small satchel. Picking through it, she eventually found a small, round glass bottle sealed with a cork. Bright green liquid sloshed about inside. The woman tilted Lorelei's head back and gently poured the liquid into her mouth. A sickly green glow seeped through Lorelei's closed eyelids. Like I said, I'm a bit of a hoarder when it comes to medicines, the healer said. Isaac watched as she tucked Lorelei back into the bed, the blankets swallowing her. Then the woman settled herself back at the table. She looked at him gravely. I think she'll have to stay here for a while, the woman said, her voice low and resolute. "She's in no shape to go anywhere, especially through the city. She'd never make it out alive." Isaac looked down at the table and shook his head, clenching his fists. Leaving her behind was not part of his plan. An Insone in the Absian city was like a butterfly in a spider's nest. "No," he said. "I won't leave her here." "You must," the woman insisted. "I promise. I'll watch after her, and when the time comes, I'll get her out of the city, to safety." Isaac considered the circumstances, the weight of his situation pressing down on him, then realized that Lorelei was in the safest place she could be. He nodded in approval. Then his eyes snapped up from the table at the healer. "You know of a safe passage out of the city?" he asked. "One where the king's guards won't follow?" The woman nodded slowly and pursed her lips. "Indeed, I do," she said. "But there are worse things than the king's guards to be worried about. He has many things that look out for him, that keep the city under his thumb. There are perils among the very stones and statues of this realm. You'll be needing something more than just courage." She hurried to a large chest that sat in front of a shelf full of herbs, books, bottles, and vials. The ancient wood creaked as she flipped it open. Sifting through its contents, she eventually found what she was looking for: an ornate leather drinking pouch. She pulled it out of the chest and brought it to the table. Isaac could make out more of its details. He saw that the leather had been tooled and carved in striking, intricate patterns that twisted and writhed in the dim light. "There isn't as much as there used to be," she said, her voice tinged with regret. "You and your friend won't be the first I've smuggled out of the city to safety." She unscrewed the mouthpiece of the pouch, and a beam of light shot out. "It doesn't take much," the woman said, "but it won't last long." "What is it?" Isaac asked. "Just a sip makes you invisible to anyone that means to do you harm, for a time," she said. "Unfortunately, only a few sips remain." She took the pouch and delicately slung it over Isaac's neck and shoulder. When he reached to touch it, he was surprised to feel its icy coldness. "Thank you," he said. "Where does it come from?" The woman replied with a stare and a smile, then said, "It's better not to ask." Then she scuttled over to another much larger chest that sat at the end of the bed Isaac had been sleeping in. She began flinging articles of clothing onto the floor. Each rejected piece of clothing was followed by a remark of disapproval. "Nope. No. Absolutely not." Eventually, she stumbled upon something that seemed to meet her approval. "Ah, this might work," she said, holding the garment up to the light. She moved back to Isaac and pulled him up and out of his chair. The garment she slid onto him was long, reaching down to his knees. It was a patchwork of black fabric held together with tight stitching. The tattered and frayed ends dangled loosely. Black feathers were sewn throughout it, and the edges were embroidered with deep purple diagrams that looked similar to the ones on the woman's clothes. The woman buttoned the long line of buttons that ran down the front with surprising speed. Her human hands worked from the bottom as her claws worked from the top, meeting in the middle. She moved back to the chest and retrieved a pair of matching gloves, boots, and a scarf, all black. Isaac put the boots and gloves on. For as sturdy as the outfit felt, it was surprisingly light and fit surprisingly well. Isaac unwrapped the scarf and set it on the table. The woman was pulling books and scrolls from her shelf, piling them on the floor around her. "It's in one of these," she said. "Ah, here it is." She brought an old, tan, water-stained piece of paper over to the table and unfolded it in front of Isaac. It was a highly detailed map of the Absian city, containing buildings, landmarks, swirling streets, and many notes that the woman had penned all over it. She tapped one of her crab claws onto an area that was highlighted with red ink. Above the red highlight read, "Catacombs." "This is your way out," she said. "You'll enter through a crypt. Once you get here, you won't need to worry about getting lost. It only goes in one direction." There are things down there, spirits. They can't hurt you, but don't listen to them. Some of them are harmless, but some of them are lost and miserable, tormented. Isaac didn't like the sound of lost, miserable souls or the thought of escaping through a haunted subterranean passageway. There isn't another way? He asked. There are many ways, she replied, but very few remember that this path leads out of the city. Although dark and frightening it may seem, it is the safest way. There will be 2 points along the way where it will feel as though you've hit an impasse. They both leaned in over the map. Here, she said, tapping the red highlight, there will be a crypt with tall stone pillars. The gate in front of it will be locked. Isaac nodded, and the woman continued. In front of the crypt, there's a statue, a grave marking for one of our kings that has long since passed. He was noble and kind, and would be very sad to see the descent his realm has taken. The statue is of him, sitting upon a throne. He holds a conch shell flute, a replica of one he held when he was alive, that he would play in times of celebration or times of battle. The flute is the key to the crypt. Can you read music? Have you ever played an instrument? She asked. Isaac had never played music. He'd heard songs performed by balladeers many times and hoped to one day pick up an instrument. But hopes wouldn't change his predicament. No, he said. I've wanted to, but no. That's okay, the woman said. She flipped over the map and drew a diagram consisting of 6 rows of circles. Each row had different circles blacked out. The black circles are where your fingers go, she said. Play the notes from top to bottom, and the doors will open. Then she whistled the 6 notes. They reverberated all around the room, and their resonance hung in the air like echoes down a well. The healer went over the route to the catacombs with Isaac, describing landmarks and places he should avoid, along with various perils and pitfalls he would encounter. Then she explained the musical diagram one last time. She folded the paper back up and handed it to him. He tucked it into his coat, along with the heart and the eye. What's the second impasse? Isaac asked. The woman was silent for a moment, then said, No advice I can give you can prepare you for the catacombs. To get there, you will pass over a bridge, under which water as old as the earth itself flows. That water flows through the catacombs as well. The catacombs are not meant for those who are still alive, but just know you must keep going. The only way through is to keep going. The dark spirits will test you. They will play upon your fears. This whole mess, Isaac said, has played upon my fears. I've seen things already that feel like they've come from my nightmares. Let them try. I won't turn back. Isaac wrapped the scarf around his head, leaving just holes for his eyes. He flipped the hood of his coat up and slipped his gloves on. The woman looked at him like a mother looks at her child on their first day of school. Then her expression went solemn. Don't fear what's below, in the waters, or the catacombs. Remember, they can't hurt you. You'll find your family, she said, and when the time comes, you'll know what to do with the heart. She leaned in close and clasped her hands around his. They were soft and warm. Set it free, she whispered. After thanking her and her reassuring him that Lorelei would be safe, Isaac was off. He slipped out the back door of her cottage. Outside, he couldn't tell if it was day or night. The city seemed gripped in a grim twilight. The healer's house was built with dark, mossy wood and looked odd among the black stone buildings surrounding it. Isaac descended the short set of cobblestone steps that led out the back door into a courtyard. He made his way through a garden of vibrant plants, none of which he recognized, to a tall, knobby wooden fence with a gate. The gate creaked as he slowly opened it and peeked out. The gloomy contrast of the alley was startling compared to the whimsical courtyard he'd just walked through. As he stepped out into the wet, dank space, closing the gate behind him, the safety of the cottage felt miles away. The green and purple lights he'd seen as he and Lorelei floated above the city pulsed along the stones and structures around him, veins of the Absian kingdom carrying light and unknown energies. Gas lamps were sprinkled down the alley as well. Their flames were like the flames he'd seen in the king's throne room, deep purple, outlined with solid white. Isaac saw no one and wondered if it was night, or if night was something the Absians even had, or acknowledged. All of the buildings he passed were varying degrees of overgrown or decayed. Some looked more alive than others, and some looked like ancient ruins. Their shapes and sizes varied as well, some being built with obsidian stone while others seemed to be held together solely by nautical plant life. Collages of algae, moss, and ivy, bioluminescent barnacles, coral, and anemones swayed in unison as though they were underwater. To Isaac, it was as beautiful as it was terrifying. He reached the end of the alley and poked his head out to see a wide cobblestone street. Sleeping buildings and storefronts loomed over it. Off in the distance, Isaac noticed a few silhouettes shambling in his direction. Then, something passed by that almost swiped his head from his shoulders. It was a large eel that flew through the air as if swimming through the sea. It looked back and hissed at him, exposing long, jagged teeth. He looked back at the silhouettes and saw a glowing, red figure behind them, one of the king's guards. Isaac ducked into the alley and pulled the map from his coat, looking to plot his next move. Then he peered around the corner of the alley again. To his relief, the red light had dimmed. The guard was patrolling in the opposite direction. As nonchalantly as he could, Isaac crossed the street. There was another alley up the block that he was hoping he could make it to without being noticed. He stayed close to the sides of the buildings, avoiding the torchlight and sticking to the shadows. Rickety, empty carts littered the streets, and Isaac wondered if he was passing through some sort of market district. He wasn't sure which was worse, making his way through crowds of Absians or sneaking around without anyone to blend in with. The city felt like a deranged version of cities he'd seen in the past. Everything felt like it was being consumed by the depths of the ocean. An uneasy chill ran up his spine as he approached a statue of a gargoyle-like creature hanging on a ledge outside of one of the shops. It had octopus tentacles squirming from its face, frozen in time, and its wings were tattered and mossy. Pointy webbed fins ran down its arms. Isaac stopped for a moment and looked up at it, marveling at its intricate detail. It almost looked alive. Just then, Isaac heard a loud popping sound, like someone uncorking a massive bottle of wine. He spun around to the street and watched as a group of oversized stingrays erupted from a hole in the middle of the street. The plug that had covered the hole flew into the air, landing somewhere out of sight. The stingrays flew straight up, like eagles, toward the dome that surrounded the city. Isaac watched as they made it to the translucent barrier and passed through, continuing to fly into the ocean water above. Then he heard a faint sound from behind him. It sounded like stones grinding together. He turned slowly and saw that the eyes of the gargoyle were beginning to open, and its massive stone wings were beginning to unfurl. Red light from its eyes, similar to the light of the guard's armor, cut through the darkness like a knife. Isaac bolted toward the alley he'd set out for, his footsteps echoing off the cobblestone. Two red beams tracked back and forth around him as he went. When he looked back, he saw that the gargoyle had climbed down from its perch and was headed toward him. He could hear the statue slamming into the cobblestone street, stone on stone, a bone-chilling symphony of ancient power and relentless fury. The beams of red intensified. Isaac was sprinting toward the alley's opening now. When he looked back again, the gargoyle was much closer. Its wings stretched out to their full span, casting a shadow that seemed to swallow the space in front of it. The tentacles on its face were squirming, like overgrown worms, and its mouth was agape, showing a red glow within. His disguise was useless against the statue. It saw right through him. Isaac's heart pounded in his chest as he ran faster. Behind him, the gargoyle pursued with terrifying speed, its massive, clawed hands slamming into the ground as it propelled itself forward. The impact of each step sent cracks spiderwebbing through the streets, and the very stones beneath Isaac's feet seemed to tremble in fear of the beast. The creature's wings beat furiously, stirring up a whirlwind of dust and debris that swirled around Isaac, obscuring his vision. He could feel the hot, rancid breath of the gargoyle on the back of his neck, its snarling maw inches from his head. The tentacles that hung from its face squirmed like living serpents, reaching out for him with a hunger that seemed insatiable. Isaac ducked and weaved through the streets, but the gargoyle was relentless, smashing through obstacles with ease. Its wings buffeted the air with such force that Isaac was nearly knocked off his feet. The red beams from its eyes swept back and forth, cutting through the darkness, searching for any sign of its prey. Isaac's lungs burned as he pushed himself to run faster, but the gargoyle was closing in, its massive form looming ever closer. The creature's growls grew louder, more frenzied, as it gained on him, its tentacles slashing through the air. Just as Isaac felt the gargoyle's claws graze his back, he turned sharply, darting down a narrow side alley. The creature roared in frustration, its massive bulk crashing into the walls as it tried to follow, but the alley was too narrow, and the gargoyle snarled in fury as it was forced to pull back, its claws raking the ground in frustration. The creature's eyes flared with a feral light as it crouched low, its muscles tensing like a coiled spring. With a powerful leap, the gargoyle took to the air, its wings beating furiously as it soared above the rooftops, searching for another way to cut Isaac off. Isaac's mind raced as he darted through the twisting alley, the shadow of the gargoyle sweeping over him like a dark cloud. He could hear the creature's wings beating above him, the sound like thunder in the night. The gargoyle was toying with him now, diving low to snap at him with its razor-sharp teeth before swooping back up into the sky. Isaac knew he couldn't keep this up for long. The gargoyle was too powerful, too relentless. He needed to find a way to escape its wrath, to hide from its unyielding pursuit. The alley ahead opened up into a wider street, and Isaac's eyes darted around, searching for anything that might give him an edge. But the gargoyle was too fast. With a deafening roar, it descended from the sky, its massive form blocking the exit. Isaac skidded to a halt, his heart pounding in his chest as he faced the towering beast. The gargoyle's eyes blazed with a savage hunger as it advanced on him, its claws flexing in anticipation. Isaac's mind raced. He had no choice. He had to use the pouch. His hands trembled as he fumbled with the stopper, pulling it free as the gargoyle lunged at him. The world seemed to slow as Isaac took a sip. The icy liquid slid down his throat as the gargoyle's claws passed through the air where he stood just moments before. The creature roared in frustration, its red beams sweeping over the empty alley as it searched for its vanished prey. Isaac held his breath. His heart pounded as the gargoyle's glowing eyes passed over him, unable to see his now invisible form. The gargoyle sniffed the air, its tentacles writhing in confusion as it searched for his scent. Isaac stood frozen, watching as it stalked up and down the alley, its fury growing with each passing moment. The creature's claws gouged deep trenches into the stone walls as it vented its frustration. Its roars echoed through the night, but Isaac was safe, hidden in the shadows, his breath shallow as he waited for the creature to move. Finally, with one last enraged snarl, the gargoyle spread its wings and flew off. Isaac let out a shaky breath, the tension in his body slowly easing as he watched the gargoyle vanish from sight. Sticking to the shadows as his invisibility slowly faded, he found another alley halfway down the next block. He went in, thankful the gargoyle hadn't alerted the guards. It was dark, and Isaac could smell something rancid wafting through the air. The shadows seemed to wiggle and dance in unnatural ways, and Isaac thought he could hear whispers in the darkness. He considered taking another sip from the pouch, but decided it would be best to reserve the liquid for truly desperate situations. A flicker of hope sat far off at the end of the alley, something the woman had told him about and marked on the map. The bright, swirling vortex of water that Isaac would cross to get to the catacombs. It held perils of its own, but for now, he was focused on making it through this new alley in one piece. Isaac made it a few yards into the alley, then heard a series of loud clinks behind him. He turned and saw a metal grate that had been attached to one of the buildings on the ground, sizzling and melting. Looking up from the puddling metal, he saw another moving shadow. This one was different. It swirled like black ink dropped into spinning water and dripped onto the stones of the alley, eating away at them. A dark tendril shot from the shadowy mass at Isaac. He held up his arm to defend himself. The power of the heart of Gaia surged through him and created a force field. Isaac could feel the sizzling heat on the other side and knew that the field wouldn't last long. Aligning his strength with the strength of the heart, he pushed forward as hard as he could. The tendril recoiled, and Isaac again heard dissonant whispers. They sounded hurt and angry. Isaac spun around and began to run into the darkness toward the light at the end of the alley. He looked back and saw that the shadow seemed to be growing as it moved. It was collecting darkness and other shadows as it came for him. The sound of its swirling mixed with the ever-growing sound of the whispers. Isaac could feel them in his head, calling to him and pulling him toward the darkness. The power of the heart fended off several more whips from the creature's arms. Isaac felt hot stings slash across his back and legs. As he approached the end of the alley, he tripped on a stone and tumbled forward. His head was ringing, and his vision was blurred. He pushed himself up from the stones, expecting the shadow to engulf him at any moment, to wrap him in a sizzling darkness forever. But it didn't. Isaac had tumbled into the glow that illuminated the end of the alley, and the dark thing dared not go there. It sat at the edge of the darkness, whispering and hissing, unable to move into the light that would surely be its undoing. He crawled to the side of the alley and looked around the edge of the buildings. Off in the distance, he saw two glowing red figures. Guards. He'd need to make his way across the street and onto the bridge that would take him across the vortex before he was noticed. Pulling himself to his feet, he took a few deep breaths until the ringing in his ears quieted a bit. Then he darted across the street, leaving the shadowy horrors behind. The bridge on the other side was one of many that crossed a vast, glowing chasm of swirling water. Isaac knew better than to look down into it. The healer had warned him not to, several times. The other bridges looked much sturdier, but Isaac couldn't risk going to them and being seen by the guards. He already looked suspicious enough and didn't want to draw any more attention to himself. The ruined, unpopulated bridge was ironically the safest. The chasm was wide and menacing and looked as though it would swallow him whole. Words his father used to tell him while loading cargo onto their ship across narrow docks rang out in his mind. "One foot in front of the other, lad. Go as slow as you need, but be as quick as you can." Isaac was moving slowly, The narrow stone bridge felt like it was crumbling beneath him. The light of the waters beneath filled his peripheries, and he could feel it, calling to him, beckoning him to look down. He kept his eyes forward and tried to focus on the other side. There were massive stone pillars and large cast-iron gates that arched and twisted between them there. Ivy dangled and swung from the gates, and Isaac could see the torch-lined stone stairs that led to the graveyard the healer told him about. The graveyard itself was obstructed by a huge stone wall, trees, and dark overgrowth Isaac couldn't see past. The statue of the old king and the entrance to the catacombs were somewhere on the other side. Looking across to another bridge, far off in the distance, Isaac saw 2 red dots, guards patrolling, searching for him, for the heart. Had his path not been waylaid by the gargoyle, that bridge would have been the one he found himself attempting to cross. Isaac thought of more of his father's words. The heart doesn't want to be found by those with dark souls, by those who would use it for dark things. Just then, Isaac felt a stone shift beneath him. The stone crumbled, and chunks of it fell to the waters below. Isaac slipped and tried to grab onto the mossy stone parapet, but couldn't find his grip. He fell forward, and his entire body jerked as his boot jammed into a cavity another falling stone had created. He dangled from the bridge, hanging like a broken marionette, swaying in the wind, with nowhere to look but down. The swirling vortex below mesmerized him. Everything around him was a blurry mirage compared to the vibrant, churning waters below. All thoughts of looking away fluttered from his mind, like a bird escaping its cage. The whirlpool began to pulse with an unnatural energy, and its depths opened. As he stared into the waters, pale, bloated corpses began to float out of them. Their eyes were wide open, but solid white and lifeless. Their mouths were agape, as if caught in a silent scream. Unnaturally long arms and legs clawed at the air as they rose from the abyss. Among the rising corpses, Isaac saw phantom forms that resembled fallen sailors, their faces contorted with fear and agony. Their eyes glowed with an eerie light as they drifted toward him. Their moans and whispers felt like they were coming from the depths of the sea itself, the wails of lost souls condemned to an eternity of suffering. Then he saw something that was more terrifying than any of the emerging figures. Familiar shapes, drifting out of the raging depths, were his father and brother. His father's figure emerged first. The water cascaded off of his emaciated body like thick, dark sludge. His once strong frame was gaunt. His skin, a sickly, grayish blue, stretched tight over his bones. The green in his eyes had been replaced with a menacing, burning light. Seaweed and barnacles clung to his tattered clothing, and his once calloused hands, from years of work, were now clawed and bony, reaching for Isaac with an unnatural hunger. Isaac's brother's bloated and swollen figure followed. He looked like he had been submerged in water for far too long. His skin was a pallid, greenish hue, covered in festering sores that oozed a dark, oily substance. His eyes were wide and bloodshot, bulging from their sockets. Matted hair, tangled with sea debris, hung in wet clumps around his face. His arms and legs were twisted in strange, impossible angles. Both figures seemed to struggle as they rose, as if the vortex itself resisted releasing them. Tendrils of dark water clung to their bodies like chains. Their movements were slow and labored compared to the other things that shot from the vortex. Yet their eyes remained locked on Isaac, filled with inexplicable sorrow. As they drew near to him, their voices joined the garbled, dissonant cries, whispering accusations, blaming Isaac for their twisted fates. Guilt rushed through Isaac as he dangled over the bridge. Then, something erupted from the center of the swirling whirlpool. The captain of the pirate ship. He was smiling a devious, dark smile, and the green light beneath his translucent skin strobed through his body in veinous patterns. His rotten and tattered beard and hair flapped wildly as if he sat in a crow's nest during a storm. The slimy barnacles and oceanic plant life breathed and undulated on his twitching face. His hissing red-eyed eel of an arm shot up and wrapped itself around Isaac's father's neck. Isaac wondered if he was too late in saving his family, if these apparitions were in fact the lost, tormented souls of his father and brother. Then he remembered the words of the healer, how the spirits would test him and prey upon his fears. Isaac closed his eyes and whispered, "No." He pulled the scarf that had been wrapped around his head off and tied one end into a loop. Turning his head up and away from the nightmares, he opened his eyes and took aim at a stone jutting from the bridge above him. Wisps of green and yellow light were starting to curl up all around him. The sound of the things rising out of the water was becoming deafening. Isaac took the scarf and spun it around a few times, like a lasso. On his second attempt, he managed to wrap the scarf around the stone. He was thankful that it was made of sturdy material, as he slowly pulled himself up. Wincing in pain, he was able to dislodge his foot from the bridge and fully pull himself to safety. Isaac wiped the sweat from his brow and quickly rewrapped his head while peering across the vast chasm to the other bridges. He hoped his slip hadn't caught the attention of the guards in the distance. To his relief, the two red dots he'd seen before his fall were gone. Very carefully and with extreme effort to not look down, Isaac made his way across the ruined, crumbling bridge, ignoring the lights and the siren calls of the voices below. Legs trembling, he got to the other side. The stones were much sturdier and far less wet from the mist of the waters below. The grotesque images of his father and brother haunted him with every heartbeat. The air was cold. He looked up at the twisted metal covered in moss and ivy woven between the massive stone pillars. As he walked under it and through the pillars onto the stone steps, he felt as though he was entering the open mouth of some ancient, cruel beast. Shadows, which Isaac hoped wouldn't come to life, danced upon the stones as the flames of the torches flickered. He ascended the damp, old steps. The sound of the churning water softened behind him, and the water's light, along with the agonizing visions, were left behind. Isaac peeked over the top step cautiously, not knowing who or what he might see in the graveyard. The space felt desolate and shrouded in twilight even darker than the cities. The gravestones and statues were cracked and covered with overgrowth. Some of them looked like bulbous, plant-like boils protruding from the earth itself. Thick fog curled around them like grasping fingers. The ground was uneven, dotted with tufts of sickly grass and scattered bones that crunched under Isaac's feet as he walked. The perimeter of the space was surrounded by more mangled cast-iron gates and tall, menacing hedges. Barnacles, algae, and rotten plant life infected every inch of the graveyard, except for the statue sitting at the far end. The statue of the long-dead king. It was sitting in front of the crypt that was the entrance to the catacombs. Its presence felt both regal and unsettling. Isaac half expected him to look like the wretched, still living king he'd encountered in the fortress. But he didn't. The statue depicted the king, seated upon a stone throne. His face was noble, yet full of sorrow. His hand delicately held the conch shell flute into the air. Despite the stone's age, the details were surprisingly precise. The deep-set eyes seemed to follow Isaac as he approached. It almost appeared real, as if it could spring to life at any moment, like the gargoyle. His ornate crown, although stone, seemed to glisten as it reflected the light of the torches surrounding the graveyard. Isaac could hear shuffling, and his attention quickly shifted to the two guards flanking his left and right. They were undoubtedly the two guards he had seen patrolling the other bridge. They were tall, twisted, nautical figures, clad in dark armor that seemed to absorb the light. Their faces were obscured by helmets, with visors resembling giant fish skulls, and their posture was unnaturally still, as if they were extensions of the graveyard itself. They carried long, twisted pikes that had glowing red tips. Isaac's heart pounded as he considered his options. He knew he needed to reach the statue, but the guards seemed to be only beginning their patrol of the graveyard. He remembered the invisibility potion the healer had given him, but the thought of using it again, with so little left, worried him. There had to be another way to get past the guards without risking his only advantage. Relying on the power of the heart of Gaia was something he wasn't willing to do at that moment. Control of it was fickle, and Isaac couldn't risk creating too much of a scene when he was so close to his exit. His eyes darted around the graveyard, searching for anything that could help. Then he noticed a row of decaying trees along the edge of the graveyard, their branches gnarled and twisted like the hands of the dead. An idea sparked in his mind. If he could create a distraction, something loud and chaotic, it might draw the guards away, giving him the chance to approach the statue unnoticed. He carefully made his way over to the tree line, keeping low and covered by the fog. The bark of the trees was brittle and covered in a strange, slimy moss that glowed faintly in the dim light. Isaac found a large, thick branch lying on the ground. It was big, but it was also light from being mostly decayed. He hefted it up, feeling the rough texture against his hands, and then hurled it with all of his strength toward a cluster of tombstones far from the trees. The branch struck the stones with a resounding crack, shattering one of them and sending shards of stone flying. The noise echoed through the silent graveyard, a jarring sound that pierced the stillness. The guards immediately snapped to attention, their heads swiveling toward the sound of the disturbance. Without a moment's hesitation, they moved in unison toward the sound. Their long strides carried them away from the statue and deeper into the fog-shrouded graveyard. Isaac held his breath, waiting until they disappeared into the mist before he dared to move. He moved quickly through the fog to the statue, glancing back to ensure the guards were still occupied. The statue of the king loomed over him, its eyes seeming to gleam with an unnatural light. Isaac very carefully climbed up the statue and out onto the king's extended arm. He pulled out the map the healer had given him, turning it over to reveal the musical diagram. He glanced at the blackened circles and then at the conch shell flute in the statue's hand. There was no time to waste. The guards could return at any moment. He reached out and placed his lips on the mouthpiece of the flute, curling one arm around the statues to place his hand on the sound holes. Then he began to play the notes, as the healer had written them. The sound that emanated from the flute was haunting, a series of tones that echoed across the graveyard, reverberating off the tombstones and other statues. The fog around him seemed to pulse in time with the music, and the graves themselves seemed to tremble, as if the souls buried there were stirred by the melody. The stone pillars behind the statue began to creak and shift. The gate they supported groaned as it slid open. Just as the final note lingered in the air, Isaac heard the guards returning, their footsteps heavy and swift. Panic gripped him as he realized he had no time to flee. With a shaky hand, holding tight to the statue to keep his balance, he uncorked the leather pouch and took a quick sip of the invisibility potion, feeling the icy chill of it spread through his veins. The world around him shimmered, his form blurring, just as the guards reached the statue. They stopped abruptly, their skull-like visors scanning the area where Isaac had been standing moments before. The guards exchanged a brief glance, then resumed their patrol, oblivious to the invisible Isaac hanging mere feet above them. Holding his breath, Isaac very quietly slipped down the statue. Staying low and moving as quickly as he could, he approached the entrance to the crypt. The catacombs awaited within. As he stepped through the gate and under the stone archway into the crypt, an overwhelming sense of dread washed over him. The air itself felt laden with the weight of countless forgotten souls. The darkness ahead seemed almost alive. Light from the cemetery's torches flickered upon the walls, like the last embers of a dying fire. The dim glow cast distorted shadows along the walls, which were slick and covered in patches of black mold that seemed to pulse and breathe. He brushed against the clammy walls as he moved deeper into the tunnel. His footsteps echoed off the walls, creating the illusion that something or someone was following close behind. Isaac paused, holding his breath. But the silence that followed was even more unsettling, thick and suffocating, as if the very air had been drained of life. The smell hit him next, an overwhelming stench of decay and damp earth mixed with something acrid and metallic that stung the back of his throat. It was the smell of old death, of things long buried, but never fully at rest. Isaac gagged, trying to stifle the nausea that rose in his chest, but the odor seemed to cling to him, permeating his clothes and skin. It felt even colder than the graveyard itself. Faint whispers began to drift through the tunnel, barely audible, like the rustling of dry leaves on a windless night. At first, he thought it was just air passing through the tunnel, but the whispers grew louder, more distinct, until they formed words, broken, disjointed phrases in a language Isaac couldn't understand. The voices seemed to come from all around him, echoing off the walls, rising and falling in a ghostly chorus. Their oppressive thickness was beginning to drive him mad. They got louder, more persistent, until they were a cacophony of voices, each one pleading, crying, cursing, and begging for release. Isaac's hands trembled as he gripped the cold stone walls for support, the rough surface scraping against his fingers. He grabbed the sides of his head and shouted into the darkness, "Stop!" All at once, the whispers and the voices were gone. As much as he wanted to, there was no turning back. He had to keep moving forward, deeper into the darkness. This part of the story might have actually been my favorite part to write. I like the atmosphere of the Absian city and the darkness and the creatures and the overall sense of unease that was embedded into this piece of the story. The next part of the story, I don't want to say the ending because I said that last time and look where we are. But the next part of the story, potentially the ending, will be out very soon. I really hope you enjoyed listening to this one as much as I enjoyed writing it. And I'm really excited to show you where Isaac goes next, how the ending of this tale unfolds. So stay tuned. If you'd like to support the podcast, there are a few ways you can do so. The first of which is leaving a rating or review on whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. Really does go a very long way. The next way is to just tell your friends and family about the podcast, maybe share a link, let them know what you like about the show. And the last way is to join the Strange Whispers Patreon. There will be a link to that in the show notes. Over there you get early access to episodes and some exclusive content that you're not going to get anywhere else. However you choose to support, I greatly appreciate it. I'll see you all for part 5 of The Heart of Gaia. And until then, keep creating.